Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today, I'm speaking with Dan Kreiness. Dan is an instructional coach at Norwalk Public Schools and a doctoral candidate at the American College of Education. He was also recognized as an ASCD Emerging Leader in 2017 and is the host of the Leader of Learning podcast. You can follow Dan on Twitter at @dkreiness and on his blog at leaderoflearning.com. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
First of all, I appreciate that introduction very much, and you know that I am always down for talking education.
Well, I love that, Dan. We've had many Voxer conversations, and now we are putting it out for the world, so this should be fun. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your current situation? I know things have changed a little bit for you this year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you mentioned I'm an instructional coach in the Norwalk Public Schools here in Connecticut. At a middle school level. So I am working with grades 6, 7, and 8. And this time around, I'm an instructional coach really for just one content area. So my responsibilities are with the ELA teachers. And I have about 9 staff members in the ELA department who I'll be supporting and really just, helping them and supporting them at what they want to do in their classrooms and hopefully challenge them and inspire them to innovate in terms of their instructional practices so that they can, at the end of the day, just make their students better and that teaching and learning process just even more ramped up than it already is.
Dan, I talked on an episode with Janelle McLaughlin about how much I value this instructional coach role. Last year was the first year that I had ever experienced what a support that can be. I mean, before last year, I just never had someone in my 18 years of education. I just never had someone in my classroom who I really felt like was not there to observe and evaluate, but actually to coach and offer advice. And that was game changing. So more power to you. Dan, it's story time. Share with us about a low moment or some kind of an experience of adversity that you faced in your teaching or education career, and then describe how you overcame it.
You mentioned a minute ago that things have changed for me a little bit in my placement and my educational career path. And so if you're a listener to the Leader of Learning podcast, or if you haven't yet, you might check out an episode that I did. It came out in early September, where I really got vulnerable and opened up about what had happened to me at the end of last school year. So during the 2018-19 school year, I started the year as a classroom teacher. And I actually thought that would be one of the lower moments of my career, because what happened was after spending 3 years as an instructional coach, my position was cut and I was asked to move back into the classroom as a reading teacher. And I felt at the time that it was a little bit of a downgrade, moving backwards in my career rather than a step forward. I had been looking to get into administration for a while, and leadership has kind of become my thing. And so I think I was a little bit quick to jump into an administrative role. I started looking around a little more actively at what jobs were out there for me. And I was picked up as an administrator in a district in New York. And suffice it to say, I only stayed on that job for 8 months. And without getting into too much detail, it just didn't work out the way that I had hoped it would for lots of reasons. But I think at the end of the day, what it really boiled down to was I'm not sure that school and the administrative team was the right fit for me. And I can honestly say that I know for a fact that I wasn't the right fit for them. So unfortunately, I cut ties with that school and that district. But fortunately, literally a day later, the next day is when I was picked up by my new district here in Norwalk, Connecticut. So I'm grateful for that. Having things not work out the way that I had planned in my previous district, it still stings a little bit, but honestly, at the end of the day, I look back and think it actually was a blessing in disguise.
Sometimes great people just don't work perfectly with other great people. And I know that just listening to your philosophy and your knowledge and expertise on the podcast, I have no doubt about the value that you bring to an organization, Dan. And, it's not really about assigning blame. It's just, as you put it, saying that maybe this isn't the right fit all around and, we need to move on.
You asked about that. What did I take away from it? What did I learn from that experience? I think what you just said is probably the best lesson I could have learned, which is that sometimes it's not necessarily about the work that you're doing. It really does come down, and I guess it's really more felt at that administrative level, but it could come down to just being the right fit. And I left that job, and I told people this. My pride was intact. I had my head held high because I believe at the end of the day, the intentions were good in terms of the work that I was starting to do. I don't think I got enough time to really say that I did some great work there, but I was starting to do some good work, and it just didn't work out. But I learned that it's being the right fit, and it stung at first, but I've moved on, and now that I have moved on, that's it. It just didn't work out.
Well, I have tremendous respect for the timing. I love the fact that from a place of conviction, cut those ties before you had your next job lined up. And when I hear that, I just know that you're coming from a place of confidence and conviction, and you're doing things for the right reasons. And so to have your next situation arrive in your lap the very next day, Dan, is incredible. And I'm thankful that ordeal didn't drag out for you whatsoever. And here you are in a wonderful new role and new community. So I hope that unfolds fantastically for you as you move through this year and start to build new relationships in this new setting. Dan, I do want to talk about the Leader of Learning podcast, and I've been listening for a while and really appreciated, first of all, just your voice, I think is fantastic, and a lot of your guests and just the way that you go in depth in these different topical areas in education. So talk to us about what you've enjoyed about the podcast, what's your vision, and where do you hope to take it from here?
Yeah, first of all, I really appreciate you listening and all the support that you've given me and my show. But, I think the reason why I started it was really, I became a doctoral student and was doing a lot of reading and writing, and I wanted to share content. I wanted to find some way to help inspire educators, not just in my school or my district, but just out there, wherever there is, in the country, out of the country, across the world, whatever. And so I felt like podcasting just fit in with my interests and my abilities a little bit better than like blogging for a couple reasons. One, I'm already doing so much reading and writing in my doctoral program. So I don't know that I had the time necessarily to keep blogging. And little known fact about me, I was on the radio in college, and I had a short-lived career in broadcast journalism and sports radio production. And so I'd like to think, and I appreciate you saying this about my voice, I'd like to think that I have a pretty good broadcasting voice. So I'm like, let me try this podcasting thing. And I started listening to some educational podcasts, and they were really inspirational to me. And I'm like, I could do that. So I started the Leader of Learning podcast with episode 0, which in the podcasting world, you and I know that that's kind of like your pilot episode. You're trying it out. You want to see how it sounds. And I'm like, I think it sounds pretty good. Let me give this thing a go. And literally 2 years ago from yesterday, so we just hit our 2-year anniversary here in the beginning of September. I'm not sure when this episode will air, but we're recording this in the beginning of September. And so 2 years now it's been since I've done this, and I've learned so much. I know this might sound a bit vain or narcissistic, but I'm my biggest fan. And I say that because first and foremost, I do the show for me. I bring on guests who I really want to hear from and learn from, and I talk about topics that I'm really interested in. And yes, of course, I know that I have listeners out there, and I do try to produce content that they will enjoy, but I just really want to be proud of the product. And so that's why I need to be the biggest fan first and foremost. And so, I've brought on great guests that I've learned so much from, and I'm not going to get into, each person or each topic that we've talked about, but I can safely say that from September 2017 to now September and fall time of 2019, I've just come so far in terms of my knowledge and my experience in education from not just being connected and listening to podcasts, but definitely hosting my own show and learning from some of the amazing guests like yourself that we've had on the show.
I completely agree that first and foremost, it has to be about things that interest you, right? And I know a lot of the questions that I ask, all of the questions that I ask are really based on what I care about. I wouldn't include questions on my show that I'm not personally passionate about and interested in. So, yes, I mean, you and I'm sure you would say the same, that we learn something from every single guest. Would you not agree?
Yeah, no, wholeheartedly, absolutely agree. You know, it's just an amazingly different kind of professional learning. And, I think as education has changed in the classrooms, so has professional development, quote unquote. It's really become more of this professional learning, and it's become more personalized through social media, through podcasts, YouTube, whatever it is. An educator has the ability and the choice if they want to. They don't have to, right? Nobody's forcing anyone to go listen to a podcast or watch a YouTube video or, connect on social media. But if they want to, there's such an amazing world of connected educators out there with so much to share that they can take advantage of if they wanted to. And it's just, it's an amazing space to live in, I think.
It is so exciting. I could geek out for a while about this. I mean, I'll say there's one more thing. Even when I look at the analytics from this show and I see that people are listening from something like 50 countries around the world, and obviously the majority of listeners are here in North America, but when I see that people are listening all over the world, I just think the reach of this platform is incredible and the mode is so unique. And so, yeah, it's been a rewarding journey, and glad to hear it's been the same for you. You've been at this a little longer than I have, and I feel like you're a little smoother at the microphone. So I definitely take some notes when I'm listening to you. But let's move on, Dan, and talk about what is setting you on fire. That's the name of the show, Teachers on Fire. And you're not a classroom teacher per se. Your position is a little bit different, but talk about what is really inspiring you today in education.
So I think what's really setting me on fire and has been for a while is just innovation in the classroom. And sort of the role that I play and the angle that I put on that is I'm really at this point in my career more about the adult learning than I am the learning of our students in our classrooms. And that's not to say that at the end of the day, we don't all have the same goal of really inspiring growth in our students. But I've put a lot of stock in myself to learn as much as I can about, like you were talking about a few minutes ago, coaching and, supporting teachers in their classrooms. And really what gets me going and where I've put a lot of my time and energy and my own research into is transformational leadership and inspiring a growth mindset and inspiring change in teachers to want to innovate more and to want to make learning more student-centered and more engaging for their students. So that's really gotten me going, and it's actually led to, at this point, a doctoral degree. Well, I don't have the degree yet, but hopefully within the next several months. So it's inspired my own journey into being a doctoral student and now a doctoral candidate, and literally studying the link between leadership practices and growth mindset in teachers.
Well, that was my next question, Dan. How are you looking to grow professionally and improve your practice next year? I feel like you've already addressed that to some extent. Can you share anything more about your doctoral work? You told us what it's about. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, what's really inspired me for a while and really has me, quote unquote, on fire at this point as I start this new school year and in a new school and new role is motivating teachers and getting them to want to innovate. And so basically the idea behind transformational leadership as opposed to other styles of leadership is really influencing other people and having them step up and take a bigger part of their own journey rather than just having an influence over them, or some kind of transaction where you're like rewarding them. It's more intrinsic motivation where a leader is inspiring someone to want to change or want to innovate, and they're internalizing that and realizing the need for it and the desire for it. And so I've put a lot of time and effort and energy into studying and researching transformational leadership theory, which basically boils down to four tenets. They call them the four I's. They stand for idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individual consideration. And what's cool about that is you can, depending on how you think about leadership, you can find ways that teachers as leaders are doing that in their classrooms. And then, of course, school leaders and district leaders are doing that to lead their staff members. And so, regardless, and that's why I do my show too. I forgot to mention this before, but I wrap up every episode saying no matter who you are or where you are, you too could be a leader of learning. And I really mean that because teachers in the classroom are leaders. School and district administrators are leaders. But you know who else are leaders? School custodians, school aides, paraprofessionals, lunch monitors, kitchen staff. It all is really about the role you play and just how much of yourself you give, and how passionate you are to your job, your profession. So I love that about leadership. I really do.
I love the point you made that a lot of what applies to our students in the classroom, a lot of those same principles apply to us as adult learners as well. And something that I was looking at in my thesis is this whole idea of modern professional learning networks as, places of agency and autonomy and personalized learning. And that's what really works about it. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you decided to. And you chose the time and place and the method and the topic and the guest to some extent. And so those same principles work in the classroom. We know that. Very exciting stuff. Look forward to, I don't know if I will end up reading your entire dissertation, Dan, but I definitely look forward to hearing more of the results. One last quick thing on growth mindset in the classroom. And this is something that I talk to my students about. And that is, if you ever hear a teacher saying, I'm not a tech person or I'm not a math person, I told my students to call them out because we don't allow our learners to talk that way, right, Dan? And so as a teacher, as an educator, I really want to encourage us all to move beyond the constraints of whatever labels we've embraced and say, no, you can do some learning in this area, whether it's tech or math or art or whatever it might be.
When we talk about instructional coaching, I think, and you were saying just fairly recently in your career, did you get a coach and someone who was in your classroom regularly? And it was probably awkward at first. And I get that because some people who are in the classroom, they think that the coaching role is still one of, an evaluator, someone who's going to judge them or kind of force their own thoughts and opinions. But it's not really about that. And for me, I guess this is really like my why. And to be honest, I don't know if I've ever vocalized it like this before. So I appreciate you sort of helping to bring this out in me. But I really, more than anything, and again, it all goes back to like student achievement and student growth. But for me, I just really want to inspire people to be lifelong learners. And I say people because that goes for students and other educators alike. Now, for me, that means being connected, doing my podcast, being a doctoral student. I do really love learning, as cheesy and as cliche as that might sound. But at the heart of it all, I'm a lifelong learner and I will never stop learning. And I just really want to make sure that other people can be lifelong learners as well if they want.
It's all about posture, right? It's all about posture. And even with the teachers you work with this year, are they open? Are they receptive? Are they willing to, some people really hate the idea of their practice being critiqued. And I had to gain a comfort level with my instructional coach last year. But at the end of the day, man, I really enjoyed those conversations. And when Kathy would ask me, hey, why did you make this decision? Or have you ever thought about doing this? You're right. There's maybe an initial awkwardness, but over time, it just becomes a really comfortable dynamic. And it was so valuable. And I actually look forward to my next session with her. It's going to be helpful for sure. Dan, share with us about a personal habit or a productivity hack that contributes to your success. How do you get it all done?
Oh my God. I've been asked this question before because I'm a doctoral student. I am a father and a husband and a family man. I spend a lot of time doing the podcast and being a connected educator. And sometimes it's very hard for me to actually put into words what I do. But, you and I were talking off the air because we're in similar positions where sometimes I think what it comes down to is having to compartmentalize a little bit. And I actually have an educator friend who also has a podcast and a book, The Teacher's Journey. So Brian Costello is a friend of mine, and I have to give him some credit. I've heard him say this before, that when people talk about the work-life balance, a lot of times it's like one or the other, or you have to balance both at the same time, but it doesn't really work like that. Sometimes you literally kind of have to set one aside. Now, that doesn't mean you stop going to your job, but on your off hours, or spending time worrying about things, like, you have to put more eggs into one basket than you do the other. I have a lot of support at home, from my wife and my kids. They get what it is that I'm trying to do, especially going back to school and however much work it's taken to get to this point and to finish my degree. And that helps a lot. But I think with me, it's about understanding where my priorities lie and when. Sometimes I need to devote more time and energy and effort into writing my dissertation or submitting the assignments that I need to submit for my degree program. Sometimes if I do that too much and I feel like I'm shifted away from spending quality time with my family, or just getting the heck out of the house because I feel so cooped up because I'm in a completely online program. I haven't attended courses in person in a long time. It's okay to shift your focus and shift your priority and say, now I need to spend a little bit more time doing this. But in another week or a few days, or even a few weeks, then I'm going to shift my focus back and spend a little less time here and more time there. And it sounds simple, but I think a lot of people struggle with that. And for me, it's worked pretty well. Each year, as you know, as connected educators, a lot of people like to create their one word for the year. This past year, my one word was actually two words, and they were all in, because I wanted to go all in as much as I could on everything that I'm doing. But I just realized that there was no way I was going to go all in on everything at the same time. And so for me, all in means give your all in one area while maybe backing off in another area. And then you'll give that your all when it's time, when it's the right time to focus on just that avenue.
That is so cool. And I think you're right. There's not going to be a rigid formula for balance that looks the same every day. It's going to shift. It's going to evolve over time, but it certainly helps to have good support set up in your life. Just before we continue, I want to share an important message from the Teach Better team. Are you looking to reach more students, innovate your instruction, and teach better? Then join the Teach Better team on November 8th and 9th in Northeast Ohio for the first ever Teach Better conference. Join dynamic educators such as Dave Burgess, Tal Thompson, Adam Welcome, and more. Register now at teachbetterconference.com. And when you do, be sure to use discount code FIRE50 to save $50 on either of the 2-day registration options. That's discount code FIRE, F-I-R-E 50. Are you ready to be better? All right, Dan, it is time for your quick picks, and here we want to know the education voices and resources that are shaping your practice and inspiring your thinking today. We've talked about Twitter a little bit. Let's start there. Would you tell us about someone we should follow and share why they've been inspiring you lately?
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to actually list one person, if that's okay. I'm going to give you sort of a community of educators. And it's because it's meant so much to me in terms of getting connected and in terms of my own development as an educator. So I'm going to shout out EduMatch. EduMatch is all over the place at this point. Every social media you can find, they have their own publication, publishing company at this point. They're turning out books. They're actually very soon to launch their own podcast network, and I'm really excited about that. But Sarah Thomas is sort of the mother hen in EduMatch. She does an amazing job, and just everyone connected with EduMatch pushes each other, supports each other, and really is pumping up the education community. So I can't say enough about what EduMatch has meant to me as a connected educator over the last couple of years.
Love it, and love Sarah Thomas, former guest of Teachers on Fire as well. Dan, point us to an edtech tool that you currently love using in your space or somewhere in your professional practice. Is there something that you are encouraging your teachers to use?
Yeah, for a long time, I've just been such a big fan of Nearpod as a tech tool. And I love using a lot of different tech tools, but that one is like what I go back to all the time because I just think it makes learning so much more fun, engaging, and most importantly, interactive. There's so much you can do with Nearpod. I think sometimes feels like people just want to use it to present information, but it is very all encompassing and just I think really makes learning more interactive in the sense that students can be a part of the learning more than if they were just consuming a presentation.
And I'm going to show my ignorance here, Dan, but is Nearpod better suited to iOS environments, or does it work in the PC world and the Mac world, or sorry, the laptop world as well?
No, it's great everywhere. It doesn't even matter whether it's Mac or PC, Chromebooks. It's great to use on Chromebooks. It's completely web-based, so it really doesn't matter. It's not its own separate application. If you're using Chromebooks, there is actually a Chrome, I believe it's an extension. It's not an app, and it's an extension called Nearpod Eyes, and that'll help you basically convert presentations and online content into Nearpod friendly format so that teachers can embed web content right into their Nearpod lessons.
Dan, I know you are a student of education. You are a lifelong learner and you're modeling that so well. Recommend a book, one that you've been reading lately, or maybe one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
So the one that has probably meant the most to me all time, so to speak, is one called Lead from the Heart. And I actually had the author, Mark Crowley, on as a guest on my show pretty early on. I sort of wish, and maybe I will, that I could get him on again because I feel like I was such a novice podcaster at the time. I probably would have conducted the interview a little bit differently now. But great book, Lead from the Heart, again, with transformational leadership and just so much of what we're trying to do in education these days, it's building and maintaining super positive rapport and relationships. And that book, although it was a little bit more business-like, was very, very inspirational to me as a leader and an up-and-coming leader in education. Another one that I've read recently, and this is partially the reason why I want to mention this to you, is perhaps I could read the blog post that I wrote on your Teacher Blog podcast. But I recently wrote a blog about a book that I read just this past weekend called The Coaching Habit. And off the top of my head, I apologize, I forget the author of that. We could look it up. But The Coaching Habit is a pretty popular, again, business-oriented book about what it's like to coach others and staff members. But I really took a lot away from that. And the crux of the book is all about talking less and asking more, and that will really inspire that coaching model, so to speak. And so I really want to kind of emulate that practice in my own experiences as an instructional coach moving forward.
The author is Michael, and I'm going to murder this, but Michael Bungay Stanier, okay, that's my best guess at the pronunciation. But
No, I think that's right.
okay, so The Coaching Habit sounds like a timely read there in your context, especially, Dan. And I think I mentioned that, right, with my own story of the instructional coach that I had last year. She was so good at just asking asking these little prodding questions, not calling out my practice or ever saying that I did something poorly, but always structuring her feedback around questions.
There's strategy to that too. It's not just about probing you to reflect, but it's also getting you to really own your own professional learning. And making it such that you, as the classroom teacher, are the one who is setting your own goals and finding ways to accomplish them for you and your students, rather than the coach or the administrator giving you what they think you need. That's exactly why you want to ask those questions.
Oh, it's a transformational shift. And this whole business of metacognition is something we're trying to build into our practice, into our classrooms. How are we doing that as educators? So, it's good stuff. Now, Dan, you and I are well-established podcast nerds, so this one might be hard as well. But besides the leader of learning, what else are you listening to on your commutes these days?
Well, and besides Teachers on Fire. So, man, I have so many podcasts that I listen to, but I think if I were to mention one that I still listen to regularly and get so much out of, and was really one of the first podcasts that I started listening to well before I had my own show, Better Leaders, Better Schools. Danny Sunshine Bauer is the host of that one. He's built quite a brand now with Better Leaders, Better Schools. He has a second podcast, which is short form. So 3 to 5 minutes. It's called the School Leadership Series. He's actually been a return guest now on my show. He's been on twice, but such an inspirational show and such a cool brand to follow. So Better Leaders, Better Schools is one that I really love with Danny Bauer.
The last question here, Dan, is purely for fun, and it's just selfish because I love this kind of stuff. But what are you watching on Netflix these days?
So my wife and I had gotten into, I'm not a big Netflix guy, but what we had gotten into for a while, and we're really bummed that it's gotten canceled now, was Designated Survivor with Kiefer Sutherland. It got canceled off of ABC after the second season, and then Netflix picked it up in the third season. So we were like, yes, all right, we can get back into it now. And then they just canceled it again a couple weeks ago. So I'm not watching that anymore. But let's see, is there another one that we've sort of been binging? I don't know. I'm a big sports fan. Most of what I consume on TV, well, actually, I'll be honest, most of what I consume as a parent is kids programming and whatever my daughter might listen. My daughter rules the house. So like whatever she wants to watch usually is what we watch. But I'm a big baseball fan. New York Mets are my team. So a lot of the time I just watch the Mets.
Okay, sounds good. Dan, what are the best ways for the listeners to connect with you and get in touch with Leader of Learning and all the other work you're putting out there?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the Leader of Learning podcast, you can find that really anywhere where you can find podcasts. Hey, wherever you listen to Teachers on Fire is where you can find Leader of Learning. I have a website, leaderoflearning.com, and that's really where I'll point your listeners to if they want to find out more about me or connect with me, leaderoflearning.com. You can find the podcast. You can find everywhere that I'm connected on social media. Please reach out. Please follow me. Please connect with me. DM me, whatever you want to do, because I really appreciate this medium as a professional learning tool. And I also just love to hear from people and connect with people. So leaderoflearning.com and connect with me on social.
Sounds good, Dan. Hey, thank you so much for sharing your time with the podcast today. I've come to really appreciate just how thoughtfully and how engaged you are around education, and I've learned so much from you. So thank you for joining us today, Dan, and I should say as well on very short notice. So I really appreciate you helping me out in that respect at the end of a very busy week. Dan, I look forward to talking more on Voxer and in other spaces. I know we will, and just want to wish you in that new context a wonderful year. Take care, and let's talk again soon.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining me today here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. For show notes and links from this episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And again, please do subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Before we sign off today, I'd like to share highlights from around the Teachers on Fire community this week. First of all, I'd like to thank those of you who encourage and support the podcast on Twitter. Ariel Jankard at Mrs. Jankard recently tweeted, "Waiting for the Old Settlers parade to start. Kids are running the streets, seeing kiddos from my class and past classes, and listening to the @Teachers on Fire podcast. Love my Saturdays. Hashtag Olathe Old Settlers, hashtag multitasking, hashtag Saturday morning. At George Does PBL, loved hearing your episode." And she included a picture of a fun scene from the Johnson County Old Settlers Parade in Olathe, Kansas. So shout out to the good people there, and thank you so much for that tweet, Ariel. That really made my day yesterday. Abigail French at AW French 1 writes, "That Mr. KV is one heck of a guy. He so artfully facilitates meaningful conversation and imparts wisdom. I have learned so much from @Teachers on Fire." Well, thank you, Abby. Abby and I are good friends through Voxer, and I hear a lot from her, and she hears a lot from me on a weekly basis. And I've really appreciated her contributions on Twitter as well. Make sure to check out Abby's blog post, which came out recently on the Teachers Going Gradeless blog. And you can follow Teachers Going Gradeless at TG2Chat on Twitter. And of course, find them on Facebook. They've got a huge page there, massive following, and they're doing great work in the whole area of assessment. So make sure to catch Abby's blog post. Next, Lucretia Terrence at LTEDU Project tweeted, "I listened to the podcast, Teachers on Fire. It was so good. Thanks for sharing so many great resources, books, and great people to follow." George Valenzuela at George Does PBL wrote, "Tuned in at Teach Better Team podcast. To my pleasant surprise, at Mr. KV hosted. A must listen to fans of Teachers on Fire and Ray Hewart, Jeff Gargas, and for any educator interested in podcasting and collegiality." And of course, George is referring to a massive privilege I was given a few weeks ago, and that was hosting the Teach Better Talk podcast 100th episode edition. And that is something that I really enjoyed. I thoroughly appreciate Jeff Gargas and Ray Hewart, both former guests of the Teachers on Fire podcast. And of course, they went ahead and started the Teach Better Talk podcast. And I am a faithful listener of that one as well. So thank you for that shout out, George. I did my best. I was definitely nervous as I hosted those two greats. And yes, can't recommend their podcast enough. Stephanie Howell at Mrs. Howell24 tweeted, "Thanks for taking the time to produce this show." Chris Woods at Daily STEM, my last guest here on the podcast, tweeted, "This was such a super episode to record. At Mr. KV is such an on-fire educator. And stay tuned for when we turn the tables and I interview Tim on my STEM Everyday podcast." And I told Chris a few times, I don't feel like a qualified STEM educator myself, but I was proud to come on his show, and I look forward to hearing that one on my commute into work as well. Although I will admit sometimes it's a little cringy to listen to my own voice, but it's always interesting, and I enjoy hearing the exchange and sort of replaying the conversation in my own mind. Next, Christine Ho Younghusband at Christine YH tweeted, "That was super fun and super amazing. Thank you at NPack Louie," that's Nina Pack Louie, "and Mr. KV at Teachers on Fire for stoking my fire this morning. What a wonderful way to start my school year. Thanks for the mention, Nina. Appreciate it. Great conversation about assessment. Hashtag UNBC Ed, hashtag BC Ed chat." And that is in reference to episode 97 with Nina Pack Louie, where we talk about assessment, equity, and a number of other relevant topics in education. Great chat with Nina. And finally, Brian Carpenter at Brian Carr tweeted, hashtag fresh air at 5 under clear early morning sky. 7.4 kilometer walk. Thank you, Chris Woods, for sharing your at Daily STEM thoughts with us here on Teachers on Fire. I agree that STEM is everywhere, even in the arts. I shall follow you now as you are an inspiration. Hashtag balance LAP. Well, Brian Carpenter rightly falls into the category of mega fan. He's been a constant supporter of the podcast and has listened to every single episode. Brian asked a number of weeks ago if he could have the Well, I was going to say the privilege, although that's patting myself on the back a little too much. But Brian asked for the opportunity to host the Teachers on Fire 100th episode. And so that is exactly what you are going to hear next week, is me being interviewed by Brian. And that's going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to doing that one with him. From Twitter, let's make a quick stop at Instagram, where I don't spend as much time, but definitely follow what is happening with Teachers on Fire over there. Melissa Payden, I hope I am saying your last name correctly. Melissa Payden at Mrs. First writes, "Yes, I am teaching my first graders the power of yet." And that was following a shot that I posted, an awesome poster that I think I saw from Laura Robb on Twitter. And I hope I'm getting names right there, but basically I make a huge deal of the power of yet as I start my 8th grade homeroom for the year. And my goal is to get all of my students to the place where when someone says they can't do something and they sort of vocalize that out loud for the class, other people around them chime in with yet. And there is such power in that, sort of changing the thinking in that direction. And then at Mikey B3 wrote, "Such an important topic. You can't teach kids to be leaders if you aren't a leader yourself. And when they know your why, you're more likely to impact them in a powerful way." And Mikey wrote that in response to a quote from George Couros about our why as educators. Check out my Instagram feed for more details there. Well, Mikey B, I would really like to know your real last name, Mikey B, but Mikey B is doing some great things. Again, that's Mikey B3 on Instagram. He's doing some great things over there, and I have deep respect for his rap performance that he put on at an assembly for his school. So I'm hoping to have Mikey B here on the show at some point in the future. To all of you from Twitter and Instagram, Ariel, Abby, Lucretia, George, Stephanie, Chris, Christine, Brian, Melissa, and Mikey, thank you so much for the encouragement, my friends. You were the fuel to my fire this week, and I so appreciate your engagement and interaction with the show. Well, before we sign off, I do also want to mention the Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium. This week we featured pieces by Caitlin Giordano at Mrs._Giordano on Twitter, who published Involving Families in the Classroom. As always from Caitlin, really interesting piece about how we get our parents invested in the education and learning process for our students. And then Dr. Samantha Fesich at S. Fesich published Merge Cube Mania. And I have to admit, I'm not a big AR and VR person, but as I got into her article, I tell you, it was fascinating. And the technology that is out there right now in classrooms is pretty astounding. Wait till you see and read her review. Make sure to check out Merge Cube Mania. Now, if you're wondering what's going on at the Teachers on Fire magazine, it is a Medium publication that you'll find on medium.com or on the Medium app. If you're already an education blogger, why not consider joining our growing writing team there? You can continue to publish content on your own blog, and you keep full credit and ownership of your content on Medium. Message me at Teachers on Fire on any social media platform for more details. And I should mention, actually, that was not a purposeful omission of false humility, but I also dropped a piece on the Teachers on Fire magazine this week, and it's called Happy New Year, Teachers. And I've given what I think are 7 essentials to having a wonderful year, a year like no other. So check that out as well. Happy New Year, teachers. Well, Teachers on Fire, I'll leave you with this quote from my reading. It comes from a great work of classic fiction that I read last year, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, who writes, "Fiction gives us empathy. It puts us inside the minds of other people, gives us the gift of seeing the world through their eyes. Fiction is a lie that tells us true things over and over." So interesting, and I think that's a great quote to share with your English classes. So if that applies, or if you find a way to use that one, keep in mind Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Again, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard today from Dan Kreiness ignited your thinking and inspired your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care and have a great week.